Welcome everyone to our September issue of Ask the Mito Doc. We've missed you over the summer and are glad to be back here in the fall and excited for our best practices and a Mito care clinic talk for today. We have a big panel of doctors that will be speaking today, but I'll introduce them a little bit later. We have some housekeeping to take care of. First things first, it's Mitochondrial Disease Awareness Week, and to learn more, please visit umdf.org. I want to give you a little tip. If you go to umdf.org and you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, right in the middle, you'll see a post that contains all sorts of wonderful materials for you to share this week. So please make it a point to visit after this webcast. Next slide. We always want to thank our sponsors. They make it so we can have the nice Zoom and do all of the good things for you all. So thank you to Edith L. Trees Charitable Trust and UCB for supporting us. So before we get started, I would like to introduce Mindy Leffler. She is from EMIS, I guess formerly known as, or also known as Casimir. So come on, join me on screen, Mindy, and we'll get you started.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity. So I come from the Duchenne muscular dystrophy community because I have a 20-year-old with Duchenne. And this slide really represents all of the compounds that have failed to reach significance on their primary endpoint when they've been studied in Duchenne. And my family has participated in several of these studies, and it really represents a massive waste of investment, particularly when you don't come away with an answer. Because with many of these studies, we don't know whether it was the compound that failed or the study design that failed. Primarily questions about the outcome measures that are in use. Next slide, please. So to address that situation, myself and several colleagues have been working on outcome measures that we think will help detect change in neuromuscular disease. And so the way that it works is that we have patients or caregivers, depending on whether it's a pediatric or adult disease, take videos of everyday activities like walking, getting off the couch, going upstairs in the home environment. Those videos are taken with a really easy to use mobile app. And then we have quality monitors that look at the videos as they come in to make sure that they're all scoreable. We provide support from study coordinators that can walk you through using the app. If you have any difficulty at all, they hop on the phone with people and help them through any problems that they're having. And then we have central raters that are physical therapists that review the videos and score them against some validated scorecards. So I'll give you a little, next slide, please, a little example of how it works so you can see what we've developed in Duchenne. This is a young man with Duchenne. You can go ahead and play the video. This is what he looks like at baseline when he gets off the floor. And this is what he looks like 30 weeks later. So I have yet to show this video to anyone that doesn't kind of have that visceral reaction that it's gotten a little bit more difficult for him over time. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that we're actually able to quantify that change. So what we do is we look at the little compensatory movement patterns that these kids adopt to work around progressive weakness. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see the scorecard. So you'll see we're taking a look at things like how wide apart are their feet when they get off the floor? Are they walking their hands along the floor before they lift their trunk? Are they having to push off their thighs? So in this way, we can take a look at these little compensatory measures and quantify how many of them they're using to see if they're shedding compensations, if they're staying stable in their number of compensations, or if they're given an effective treatment. Opposite. If they're shedding compensations, if they're getting an effective treatment, or adding compensations if they're getting a little weaker. And so we've done, next slide, please, a lot of validation work on this, meaning we've tested it quite a bit. We've published a lot of manuscripts on this outcome. And we've done a lot of work over the last couple of years that suggests that this might be a way to take a look at the ease of movement in people with mitochondrial myopathy specifically. So looking at these compensatory movements might be a way to take a look at whether it's getting easier for people with mitochondrial myopathy to move around. And so what we're doing right now is we are collecting a bunch of video from the home environment with people with primary mitochondrial myopathy. And what that's going to allow us to do is basically alter the scorecards that we've built with Duchenne to movement patterns that are specific to people with mitochondrial myopathy. So for example, we're looking at this in VCP disease. Kids with Duchenne kind of walk on their toes to compensate for contractures and lordosis, which is like a really curved back. But when you look at people with VCP disease, they don't really walk on their toes. They have more of a foot drop where their forefoot kind of falls to the ground when they take a step. Well, we want to make sure that we alter those scorecards for the people with VCP disease so that they're specific to the way that people with VCP move. And we want to do the same for people with mitochondrial myopathy. But in order to do so, we need a lot of video from people with mitochondrial myopathy so that we can make sure that the scorecards reflect what we see. So in order to do that, go ahead and next slide. We're running a very low burden study where people with POLG or PMM diagnoses can apply. You can do 3 video captures entirely remotely from your home, just with your smartphone. On one day, you do a capture in the morning, and then you do a capture at night. And the reason for that is we want to see how much harder it gets for people to accomplish these activities from a morning performance to an evening performance, because that might be something we can take a look at in clinical trials. You know, do you see less of that decline from morning to evening? And then you go ahead and follow it up 1 week later with an additional morning capture. Because I really respect families for doing this kind of thing, you know, I'm one of these types of families. We like to make sure that we're acknowledging people's efforts by compensating them with a gift card for each capture that you do. And we've had participants really finish the study within 8 days. So it's a really low burden study. Like I said, we have study coordinators that'll make it really easy for families. And so if there's any possibility that you'd be willing to participate, it would be extremely helpful to us to make sure that we're really doing right by the mitochondrial community and making sure that we're reflective of, you know, the specific things that we see in that community. Next slide, please. So if that sounds like something your family might be able to do, you know, 15 minutes in the morning one day, 15 minutes in the evening on the same day, you know, 15 minutes in the morning a week later. You can go ahead and scan this QR code, or you can reach out to this email address. This is the phone number of Catherine Adams, who's our lovely study coordinator on this study. By reaching out, you are not committed to participate. You're just saying, I would like to receive some more information on participating in this study. And really our goal is to make sure that no families end up in my family's position, which is having given time, money, blood, literal flesh in muscle biopsies and tears in study participation without coming away from that participation with a definitive answer on whether that treatment works or not. So that's our main goal, and we hope that you will join us in that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mindy. If anyone has questions about the MS study and thinks about it tomorrow, please feel free to reach out to me or to Nicole, margaret.moore@umdf.org or nicole@umdf.org, and we can help as well. Now for our programming for today. So let's get started with best practices within a Mito Care Network team navigating patient care. As you see, we have lots of speakers today. Some are probably very well known to you, and some are maybe a little bit newer. So I would like to get started by introducing Dr. Bruce Cohen. We have Dr. Alali with us, Dr. Rossman, Dr. Steiner, and Dr. Ginsberg. And I believe everyone on the panel is a neurologist, with the exception of Dr. Alali. So I would like to now introduce Dr. Ginsberg and have him come on screen with me for a second so that he can share his screen and we can move forward with the rest of the presentation.
Hi, nice to see everybody. Are you ready for me to start sharing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Take it away, Dr. Ginsberg.
All right, is that working?
Yes.
Yes, all right, great. Well, thanks everybody who's here and listening. My name is Matt Ginsberg. I am a neurologist at Akron Children's Hospital. I specialize also in neuromuscular conditions. And I am going to get us started. The talk today is about kind of navigating care within a mitochondrial care network center. And so I thought I'd just start by asking a basic question, which is, you know, if you're thinking about about visiting a care center, how do you know if it's worth it to go there? What would be the expectations or the reasons to actually seek out care with a mitochondrial specialist or a specialized center that's doing it? So I could think of at least a couple categories of people who might be considering this. One would be if you have had a genetically confirmed, known, definite primary mitochondrial disorder, and you are interested in seeking the care or advice or even just getting questions answered from somebody who kind of lives and breathes mitochondrial medicine. And you just want that extra level of expertise because these are rare conditions. Another reason that you might kind of seek out care at one of these centers is if you're interested in research, and we're going to talk about research later. Dr. Cohen's going to go into a lot more detail about it, but that's how we really progress and identify new treatments and understand mitochondrial disease better. So participating in research is something we encourage, and a lot of it is going to occur at some of these centers. There are other folks who might be told that they are suspected to have a mitochondrial disorder, or their doctors have thought about it, or there's uncertain information that they've collected, that there's genetic testing that has variants of uncertain significance. If you're in that category, it also is a reasonable option to come and see a mitochondrial specialist who's really familiar, again, with the ins and outs of diagnosis, also familiar with a lot of the mimics of mitochondrial disorders. So even if you're not sure if you have one, but there's a high suspicion, or you can't really get to an answer, that might be another reason to come to one of these centers. So the next question is, how would you find a center? How would you get in? How would you get an appointment? There are probably a few kinds of options. One is the UMBF obviously has a website. They have a listing of some mito docs. They also have, there are people you can reach out to contact and can help you personally navigate the system. There's also the Mitochondrial Medicine Society has a care network of centers that have really met a certain threshold of expertise, interest in caring for persons with mitochondrial disorders. And I will put the link in the chat in a little bit after I'm done speaking, but you can go there and see the listing of websites and affiliate care network centers if you're just kind of looking to see what is maybe the closest center to you. And maybe a lot of people in here are already familiar with that. We at Akron Children's, we have a website for the mitochondrial care, and you can kind of go through there to request an appointment and reach out to our staff that way. And I'm sure a lot of the other centers in the network have similar sort of pathways. There may be a little bit of a wait time to get into some centers, so some may have shorter wait times than others. Sometimes it does take a little bit of patience. But ultimately, those are some of the reasons to kind of seek out the care and how to get into it. And then I did see a question before that I was kind of adjacent to some of this, which is, if you have a local care team, how should you get all your care at a mitochondrial care center, at a special center, or should you try to do some of this locally? I also think it's a really good question. I think it's really important to have a local team, though. So to echo what Dr. Cohen wrote, we usually, if you're coming to see us from far away, our goal is usually to give folks information about their mitochondrial condition, open up resources and opportunities for them, but to empower patients to have good quality care back at home where their regular doctors are. And sometimes that's communicating directly with doctors. Sometimes it's giving patients information that they can themselves bring back to folks at home. But I would say that's important. You shouldn't be spending all your time traveling out to doctors that are far away. We want people to also be getting good care at home. And it's just a practical issue also of, what happens if there's an emergency? What happens if you have to get hospitalized? You want people at home to know you also. All right, so with that said, I am going to turn it over to the next topic, which is, let's say you have your appointment. How do you actually prepare for that visit? What other information should you know? And that's going to be Dr. Steven Steiner, MD, PhD. I'm going to move it over to him.
Hi, everyone. My name's Steve Steiner. It's nice to meet everyone. I'm also a neurologist at Akron Children's Hospital, partners with all the fine folks you see muted at this point, but you'll hear from each one of us during this time here. In terms of my section with regards to how to get connected with us, really, one of the common questions that we've encountered from patients who visit us from locally or even outside of Ohio is, how to prepare for a visit. And we have we're ready for that in the sense that we have a group of folks who, one is not participating in this. The other one, Miss Lanham over here, our mitochondrial concierge, our nurse coordinator is I don't believe she's here, Kim Gendry. Those folks are so key in terms of helping patients through the logistics of getting to us. They reach out to families, they help coordinate, things just as collecting necessary information from, other medical appointments, testing results, imaging studies, all of that kind of stuff. And it's almost like, they provide sort of a checklist of sorts of things to kind of, know to bring to the visits. And so they you don't just come in flying blind and, or, caught without an idea of what to bring. So we usually try to prepare families for the visit, long before you set foot in our office. As I mentioned, Miss Lanham is our mitochondrial concierge, and she tends to help with the logistics of travel, local lodging, places to stay, things to do, kind of like that. It's usually a day or two of the visit. The visit itself is, I believe Dr. Lally will mention a little more about this, but she kind of helps, make sure folks have a comfortable time here and kind of help them with their local logistical questions. And in terms of what to bring to an appointment, that's really, a lot of it is, again, covered pre-visit. So all of the necessary information, which if you don't bring something and forget it, there are ways for us to get a hold of it. So it's not, the end of the world or anything like that. But, any for example, any relevant data that may help, for example, any imaging studies like MRIs or CAT scans that on a disk can help us get it loaded into our system, any relevant testing results, things like that. It's all data that we can use to help kind of create the picture for the discussion. So those are some of the key ways that someone can prepare for a visit. Also, one of the main things too, and this is probably the most important thing, is come with questions. Write them down as you think about it. If anyone's like me, I tend to not think of questions until I'm like driving home from a visit or something like that. So it helps to kind of think of some questions in advance and write them on a piece of paper, notebook, and come ready to ask some questions. So that's probably one of the most, if not the most important thing to do prior to your visit. What's next? What to expect from a visit? I will turn the mic over to Dr. Alali. He's our metabolism specialist. Dr. Alali, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Steiner. So I'm Abdulrazak Alali. I'm a clinical and biochemical / metabologist here at I'm very honored to work with the Mitochondrial Center here. So in terms of what to expect on your day of visit, I would say most of the time, our visits are usually in the morning, and you will have a communication with our team early in the morning of the visit. So you will be guided to the check-in, and then you will be roomed, your child, very smoothly, and then in a very warming and welcoming environment. You typically on the day of the visit will see me as a clinical geneticist, and you will see a neurologist, but that's also can vary. We dedicate 90 minutes for the new visits, 60 minutes for the follow-up for each one of us. So it's a long visit, but we really need that time, especially for new patients. We also expect us to have meticulously reviewed your chart and all the information sent to us. We often also request any imaging study to review them, usually in advance, but sometimes during or after the visit. The goal of the visit really depends if you have, is usually your goals as a patient, what you want to achieve in this visit. So those goals are very personalized and special and individualized. For people who have already diagnosis, they are really wanting to get more information to making sure they are doing what they need to do, and there are no gaps in their care, which is our job to identify any gaps and put a plan for them. Many times we also establish an emergency letter for them. We often try not to overwhelm you for seeing other specialists. That's really based on what you need. For example, you might need to see a cardiologist or ophthalmologist or gastroenterologist. That's, again, it's not something for everyone. It's really personalized and individualized. For patients who are suspected to have a mitochondrial disorder, they don't have a confirmed diagnosis yet. The gold standards, as you probably know, it's a molecular DNA testing, genetic testing for nowadays. We often move to what we call whole genome sequencing. It's the ultimate test we can do nowadays. If you have also a genetic workup before that is uncertain, we also navigate this and we give you our opinion. And then if there is no diagnosis even confirmed or achieved in DNA testing, genetic testing, we can discuss other options for diagnosis, which are usually muscle biopsy or screen fibroblast studies, which are more invasive studies, and they need usually different appointment. In the term of genetic testing, if you don't have a genetic testing already done, we will help you in that. We have a communication with the performing labs, and the test will be done, and then depends on the result. That might take months, weeks, 2 months. We'll arrange a follow-up visit. That could be in the office and virtual, but it depends on where you live. For the follow-up visit appointments, they are usually shorter, 60 minutes. Despite that, despite this time, many times we never stop a visit when time is more needed. So a visit can extend to beyond that time. We order sometimes some labs if depends on what we look in your chart. And there was also a short discussion at the time of the appointment between us, and there will be more detailed discussions usually in the afternoon when we go to more details and make sure we are on the same page and we are filling in the gaps. And I think that's about what you expect when you come to this visit to our center. And then I will handle the talk to Dr. Rossman, who will be speaking about what happens after the appointment and what resources we can provide you after that.
Thank you so much, Abdo. I'm Ian Rossman. I'm one of the mitodocs. I am a neuroimmunologist by training, and I work with Dr. Ginsberg in the neuromuscular clinic as well. I think that especially if this is your first visit, the first thing I would recommend, since it's a long visit, is to take a deep breath, go to the bathroom, and get something to eat. I know that sounds trite, but we need to take care of ourselves, and that sets us up for success. We often have covered a ton of information, more than you'll likely be able to keep on your head at once. So you will get a copy of our note once it's done through our medical record through MyChart or mailed to your home. And that will also be, we aim to share that with your primary care team, especially if you're from out of town. That gives you an opportunity to kind of see what our takeaways were to help answer questions that may have been asked during the visit, and that provides you as a record that you can come back to. We also have MyChart available, which is an email-based system that lets you send us non-urgent messages. I can't stress that enough. Anything urgent should always be a phone call. And if you are from out of town, it's important that if you're home, that you have an urgent issue, that you get in touch with your local providers, because often they're going to be the ones that help you get urgent care. And we're always here. Once the urgent or emergency issue is taken care of, we're here to help. But in an emergency, we want you to get the best possible care as close to home as you can. We, as the providers, get together after our clinic every week and go over cases together to make sure that our patients have the benefit of our shared experience, our shared knowledge. And this gives us a chance to also reflect and see if there are any thoughts or ideas that we didn't get to bring up that we can then send you a MyChart message with, or come up with other ideas for testing or to address at future visits. So we can continue a dialogue even if we're not seeing you again for 6 months. Our follow-up is really determined individually by what your needs are. If you live locally or if you're coming from out of town, if travel is a hardship or if travel is not a problem. Sometimes we're able to coordinate a follow-up visit for you before you even leave, and other times we'll be in communication. If you're coming for more than one service, we'll try to coordinate all of your appointments together on one day if possible, though as I'm sure many of you are familiar with working with hospital systems, that can't always be guaranteed. If you've had lab work done or other tests, sometimes those results take days, weeks, even months to come back. And so we'll be sure to communicate with you regarding those results, again, through MyChart. If you're waiting for something you haven't heard from us, you can always call and speak with Kate or Kim. They're always available during our normal business hours. And we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as we can about that. What we like to do is make sure that you know what reputable resources are available for you online. If you go to Dr. Google, sometimes you can find some not so reputable sources. So we will often make sure that you have links to pages like umdf.org and Mito Action, and there may be some disease-specific web pages that we can also alert you to. Sometimes we learn about resources out there from our patients. So if there's a source online that you're wondering, is this a good source for us, or you want to make sure we know about it, please send us that information. Your messages to us help inform us and make us better at caring for all of our patients. So it's a two-way dialogue after you leave the appointment. I think one of the most critical things to think about is be prepared for what to do in the case of an emergency. We try to make sure that you have an emergency treatment letter if that's appropriate for your particular case. This is a letter that you can have with you, or if you're within the Akron Children's community, shows up in your chart so that if you were to present to any emergency room, it has an easy to follow understanding, easy to follow document for emergency room physicians who may not be familiar with Mito disease, and say what is going on, what to do in an emergency, and more importantly, who to contact in case they have any questions. Many local providers have already provided this for our patients before they even come to see us, and I've always been very impressed with that forethought that many local providers have. If you are interested, you can sign up before you leave for some monthly newsletters, quarterly fundraising opportunities, and your needs may change depending on how long it's been since you saw us. So very often what happens after an appointment really depends on how you're doing, and you let us know what we need. And if we need to get you in sooner, or if we can help coordinate care locally, that's also things that we do. So at this point, I would like to turn over to Dr. Bruce Cohen.
Hi, everybody. I'm not sure who's running the slideshow.
Me,
can go to the-
I'll try to be good about keeping up with you.
Okay, thanks. It's great to be here. Just as a bit of an introduction, this is really, I can't tell you how excited I am to have a team around me now that's helping me take care of patients with mitochondrial disease. These are frontline doctors, all trained at Mito centers, no mitochondrial disease. And it's just delightful. We've got a great team, nurses, coordinators, and I think we're making a difference. We're trying to do what we can do is given the fact that we're a children's hospital, we don't have a natural adult hospital partner. I got involved in mitochondrial disease 40 years ago, 1983, with my first patient. One of the things that has come up in a lot of the questions right now has to do with how do I treat, this aspect of the disease, or what vitamins to take. And the thing about mitochondrial doctors and their patients is it's a long-term relationship. My oldest patient is 79 years old. I saw her a couple weeks ago. My longest patient I've taken care of since 1992. She still comes back to see me once a year. So it's really, as a physician, it's the ultimate honor to take care of people over the course of their lifespan. What Mindy Leffler said at the beginning of this meeting is critically important. It's important for a number of reasons, but most important, I think, for this group, because we're not going to get to a treatment that is FDA approved without participating in the project that Mindy talked about. I think I have a slide a little bit later about that project. So shout out to Mindy for her work that she's done based on the experiences she's had to live. So next slide. I'm going to talk about research studies. Next slide. I'm going to skip through some of this stuff rather quickly, but the role of the Food and Drug Administration is twofold. It's to put drugs out that are safe or have a safety profile that makes it worthwhile that patients take them, and it puts drugs out that are effective for the disease it's being treated for. How that effectiveness is defined is variable, but the FDA has to know that the medication is effective. And just as an example of that is if the medication makes you walk 15 more feet, so if you can walk 10 feet and then after being on the medicine, you can walk 25 feet, the FDA may say that's not particularly effective. But if you can walk 150 feet, it gets you to the bottom of the driveway so you can get your mail, the FDA may say that's effective. So that's the role of the FDA. Proper clinical trial design is complex. It's a complex process and not intuitive. Looking for those endpoints that the FDA will find valuable, that our patients will find valuable, again, is not such an easy task. And I think that's what's tripped us up for the last 10 years. And finally, current clinical trials in mitochondrial disease require participants. That's our patients that are affected by these diseases. Next slide. How do we judge whether a medication is effective? So the Food and Drug Administration is not particularly interested in approving medications that are beneficial to one patient or two patients. There's a single drug out there that I know of, triacetyleuridine, that was approved for use in based off a series of 4 patients' responses with one particular metabolic illness. But for the most part, the FDA is not going to look at small case series and approve a drug. It's going to require randomized clinical trial, generally involving a placebo versus a therapy. In other words, patients are going to need to be treated with the placebo, half the patients or a third of the patients treated with the placebo, and the other half or 2/3 treated with a investigational agent or an investigational therapy. It's got to be a double-blind design, meaning that the treating physician doesn't know if the patient's getting placebo or the investigative product, nor will the patient know. Sometimes we add what's called a crossover design, so that patients on the placebo will, at some point in the trial, be crossed over to the active agent, and those that are put on the active agent will be crossed over to placebo. Sometimes that can uncover the benefit of the medication. What we as physicians and our patients like to see is something called an open label extension. So after participating in the trial for 6 months, and you may have been on placebo for those 6 months, you get to go to what's called active agent open label extension. So everyone who wants to can get put on the real stuff, so to speak. So that even though that data may not be collected for the FDA's purpose, other than the safety purpose, everyone who participates in the trial gets the chance to be on the active agent. The primary endpoint is the most important part of what we look at in the study, and that primary endpoint could be a 6-minute walk test. It could be a 30-second sit to stand test. There are dozens of endpoints, and that's what we need to choose at the beginning of the trial as what our goal is going to be for success. And that's what the FDA is looking at, is those primary endpoint outcome measures. Next slide. I think this was discussed. I saw a slide flashing before everyone got on the call. Drug development takes place in stages. These stages can last, if there's funding for the drug, it can take 15 years to get from the discovery phase to the end of the phase 3 trial. The phase 3 trial, again, is that test looking at the medication against a placebo or standard of care. The FDA is changing its rules, and recent decisions have allowed tentative approval mechanisms. So there are medicines being released now that haven't proved to work beyond a shadow of a doubt, but the FDA is saying the data looks good enough that we think the medication can be released, it can be sold, and the company's responsible for investigating if it really works or not. And again, that's in a post-marketing type of clinical trial. So the FDA is giving some breathing room, especially to rare diseases. Next slide. So again, we talked a little bit about the primary endpoints. These are difficult to choose in mitochondrial disease. I ran clinical trials in brain tumors for about 20 years. Clinical trials in brain tumors are easy to get the primary endpoint. It's survival. It's easy. It's an easy outcome measure to measure. Does the patient survive or not? And if they survive, how long do they survive? It's not so easy in mitochondrial disease because we don't have enough patients to know what the survival really is. Survival often depends on how aggressively we treat our patients. And again, in Britain, patients generally do not get tracheostomies, which has become almost a standard of care in how we treat our sick Lee syndrome patients in the United States. And if you don't do a tracheostomy and a ventilator in a child with respiratory difficulty, that child will succumb to the illness. With a ventilator, that is not going to happen for a longer period of time. And again, it has to do with the way different countries view ethical considerations in taking care of sick patients. Next slide. I think I'm about at the end. There are obstacles in mitochondrial disease drug development. The first is that mitochondrial disease is not one disease, it's dozens, hundreds. And the FDA wants to know, are you treating one particular genetic disorder? Are you treating one particular phenotype? So you'll see, trials that pop up for Lee syndrome, for example. Those Lee syndrome trials don't include patients with Pol-G disease. They don't include patients with Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, just Lee syndrome. You'll see other trials that are geared to treating a mutation found in the condition called MELAS, the 3243 mutation. There's no clear outcome measure in these diseases. That's what Mindy is trying to develop. These illnesses have long and unpredictable courses. There's swings in function, and there's long periods of disease inactivity. We don't have a lot of patients, and that creates issues in terms of statistical issues for proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the treatment's effective. The study designs get complicated, the study duration gets complicated. Patients have to often travel, and it's very interesting. Before the pandemic, I had patients traveling from Canada, from the West Coast to participate in studies, and patients don't seem to want to travel post-pandemic. I don't blame them. I just got off a plane. The plane ride went fine, but it took me 90 minutes to get from the airport to my hotel room. Point being is I'm doing this trip for professional fun, and patients have to make the trip because they're sick. And finally, cost. These studies are not generally being done by gigantic pharmaceutical companies. They're being done by startup biotech companies that have to raise money in order to run the trial. I was just made aware that one of these startup companies went bankrupt recently. So that's the reality of the situation. Next slide. I think we're closing out now. Okay. Go to the UMDF website, take a look at MitoShare. This is a patient populated registry that's run by the UMDF. If you haven't registered, please register in this registry. Next slide. This is a shout out, I think, to the EMS, discussion. Again, you can, there's link, there's a barcode, I believe on the website, there's a barcode that you can scan in. You can do this from your home. You don't have to leave your home to participate in the study. It's imperative that we get this done. And I can't do it. Only patients with mitochondrial disease can do it. Next slide. These are the drugs. Now this slide is a little bit outdated, but these are the drugs that are in pipeline for mitochondrial disease that are being in trials being sponsored by the pharma industry. So we do have trials going on. We need patients for these trials. I think that's it. So happy. I think it's time for question and answer, but I'll turn it over to our to Margaret or Kara.
I'm trying to get my camera on.
Okay.
I'd like to bring all of the panelists back on camera. I do have a few questions for you. There are a few questions remaining in the Q&A, and if we do not get to them this evening, please know that if they are questions that are able to be answered, we will try to get them answered post-event. But I was looking at some of the Q&A that was completed during the presentations, and Dr. Steiner, I really was interested in the gene therapy response that you gave. Could you give a synopsis of that in case people weren't looking at it or have joined on their phone so that they can learn a little bit about your thoughts on gene therapy?
Yeah, gene therapy, is a really, it's an exciting form of treatment where basically you target a faulty gene and replace it with a functioning gene, and it though I'm really simplifying the mechanism of it. It's a very complicated process, and there are some disorders that are treated with gene targeted, gene-based therapies. In terms of a prospect for mitochondrial disease, there is a lot of active research looking at targeting different types of mitochondrial disease, but some of the kinks, as I worded in the answer to the question that was posed, there's still lots of kinks that need to be sorted out. Efficient delivery systems for the genes in question. There's toxicity related to the mechanisms by which genes can be delivered as well too. How the expression of the targeted genes may affect expression of other genes related to, in the area, if you will, surrounding that, in terms of an interaction between also the products of those genes that are being replaced, if you will, and products of other genes surrounding it. So there's different, and some of my partners here I know work from the neuromuscular aspect of neurology with various disorders that are actually treated with gene therapies as well too. So I'm sure they can provide some more clarity as well too. But it's definitely a prospect. It's definitely being looked at, but it's still very much in the experimental stage as well too. So I don't know if any of my partners want to expound on that in terms of some of the experience they have with sort of gene therapies as well.
There are companies forming right now that are looking to design trials for treating mitochondrial disease with gene therapy. So it is happening.
All right. Next question. What's your advice for a patient that has inconclusive genetic testing results? I know that's a loaded question, but for so many of our folks, they really struggle with the getting a report back that has VUS on it or and isn't maybe as detailed as they would want it to be, and doesn't include the diagnosis that they were hoping for. What do they do?
I would say first you need to understand what is the VUS. So a VUS, or a variant of unclear significance, means we don't have enough evidence to say this variant is a normal variation or it is really causing a problem. And for that, that's what that comes from the lab that's performing the test itself. But we still have our opinion. We will take all the clinical picture of the patients and the result itself. So it's a test. Many times we don't agree it's a VUS. We think it's a mutation. This is first. Second, if there is no enough evidence to say this is not a likely causing a problem, there are other options, and there usually are mostly beside doing some labs to see if there is any indirect evidence of a mitochondrial disorder, like some urine testing and other testing looking in your body metabolism. But if this also failed to give us an answer, then we are left with two major options. One is muscle biopsy. So we can do more study and go do even genetic testing with the muscle themselves. Or we can do what we call it studies on this fibroblast, and those require skin biopsies. And despite all that, we might not reach and diagnose in all cases. We know that many patients, many individuals with highly suspected mitochondrial disorder, we still cannot prove it. But when we look in the clinical test, it is very likely. I hope this answered the question.
So from what I'm hearing is patients shouldn't give up. They should keep trying if their symptoms are and their doctors believe that this is the right direction for them to be going, that they should keep trying. What do you see in the future for genetic testing? How do you see that kind of panning out as we move into well, I have a little story I'm going to add. When I first met Dr. Cohen, I think it was 2007, he wasn't sure that genetic testing was going to be affordable enough for patients. And now we have, at the MDF, we have a no-cost genetic testing program. So how do you see the genetic testing landscape in the future, Dr. Alali?
Yeah, so again, we need to go to the basis. So even when we do what we call it whole genome sequencing, that we are looking at we are reading all your DNA, that our knowledge in the function of DNA is still limited. So there are more genes coming. We know many genes in our DNA that are not associated with a condition, what we call it morbidity yet. So many genes are still there. We just don't know about them, and there are other factors play. When we do this testing, we really read inside the testing, but there are other mechanisms that cause problem. But something we call it epigenetics, when the expression of the DNA itself is affected in a way or another, and we don't have something to attest to look in all DNA to see that. So it's the knowledge. I think is the gap is the knowledge itself, is not the test itself. We do the testing, but we still a lot we don't know yet, and that so it will improve over time with our knowledge.
Yeah, the first clinical whole exome was released by Ambry Genetics in 2013. That's 10 years ago. It was priced at $16,000. It took about 6 months to come back. And although it was a wonderful test at the time, it's totally primitive, compared to what we can do now, and its depth. But in 10 years, the cost for a whole genome, which is probably 100 times more sensitive than that first test, is in the $2,000 to $3,000 price range. Compare that to muscle biopsies. So I don't want to be critical of muscle biopsies because I put about 200 of my patients through them between the years 1994 and 2010. The out-the-door cost, what the patient's insurance company would see, with the anesthesia evaluation, the anesthesia, the surgical, the surgeon's fees, the operating room fees, and the pathology fees, and all the testing, was between $40,000 and $50,000, and that's based off of finances, you're not taking into account the inflation that's gone on, in the last 20 years. And what we can get out of the whole genome now is, just much more specific than we could get out of muscle biopsies. Unfortunately, the technology for muscle biopsy biochemical processing has fallen by the wayside because the laboratories went out of business, in part because insurance companies wouldn't pay for it, and patients just couldn't afford writing the check themselves.
I want to
It's
add
really
one
interesting.
another point. That's muscle biopsy. We might give you a diagnosis of mitochondrial disorder, maybe, but it will not give you a definitive. It will not tell you what mutation is causing that. And
Correct.
that was limitation in involving in a clinical trial, for example, that are directed to a specific mutation/mutations or specific genes. So it's still, even if you get the diagnosis from there, it's not specific. It's more a generalized diagnosis.
Thank you so much.
I'd like
It's
to
really
also just
interesting.
jump in on that.
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to jump in that, we also, just like our patients, want to know, and when we get back a non-diagnostic genetic test, and we're left at that moment where, we don't have more testing that makes sense to do right then and there. We feel that too. We want to have answers to provide you. What it doesn't mean is that we're unable to provide care. And it's important to remember that a lot of how we treat many neurologic diseases, not just mitochondrial diseases, is symptom management and making sure that we're improving your wellness. So not having a genetic diagnosis, while there can be an emotional toll that takes, and the not knowing for sure, it doesn't mean that you don't have care options and that there aren't ways to make you feel better and make sure that your wellness is maintained. And just in 10 years, we've come, like Dr. Cohen said, so far, and technology is racing ahead. So not having an answer now doesn't mean that we won't have an answer, in the future. But we do definitely feel the same way you do when we get that non-diagnostic answer. It means that we still have more work to do. And that's part of that ongoing dialogue.
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting little segment that I wasn't expecting for today. I have one question left that I'm going to pose to each of you. And I hope that this leaves our families feeling inspired and thinking about the future. And I know it certainly will motivate us at the UMDF to keep working hard for our patients every day. But what gives you hope for the future for mito patients? And I'm going to just go around the horn. And I think I'm going to start with Dr. Rossman.
So going first, I get to take the answers that everyone else is going to give. But I think that for me, it's the families, the community of mitochondrial disease, the caregivers, the researchers. There is so much, not to use the pun, but energy in the mito world. There's hope. There's, even with the sadness that many of us endure, and we know that there's families that are grieving. That energy, the selflessness that families have expressed to try to help others, that collaboration, it really comes from just being part of this incredible community and just knowing I'm a small part of this gigantic global phenomenon of wanting to do better for our patients, push technologies ahead, bring bench science to the bedside, and that people are coming up with ideas that still have never been tested before, and they're being able to use those ideas for the first time and getting to patients at record pace. So it's hard to be patient, and I don't want anyone to be so patient that they don't ask the question, right? Ask the question, see if you can raise the money, see who you can contact, and knowing that I don't have to tell people to do that, they're already doing it. That's what gives me hope.
Oh, thank you. Dr. Alali.
So what gives me hope is really patients, the patients and their families. They are who are fighting for cure and for new treatment, and they are who are involving in trials, and they are who are supporting. So I think they are the resource, and they are the target. And that's give me hope as long as they are fighting, we will continue supporting them. We can't do nothing without them, and they they are all warriors. Everyone is a warrior for them. That to live with such a disabling condition, and you still continue to fight, and that's the source of hope for me. Science and our care all comes after what they do.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Alali. Dr. Ginsburg.
So I promise this isn't a plant, but organizations that are like the UMDF, so patient advocacy groups, are really kind of a type of glue that brings together all these stakeholders, pharmaceutical companies, clinicians, basic science researchers, patients, families, regulators, and really just catalyze so much growth, both from a scientific standpoint and really act as the sort of beacon of hope for everyone. I have a lot of respect for the MDF and other some organizations, and they serve as a source of hope for me too. So I appreciate the work that you guys are doing.
Oh, well, thank you so very much. Dr. Steiner.
So, for me, I think what drives me, and I think what drives me to continue hoping, and I try to impart that hope on patients, is kind of what we touched on earlier in terms of the advancements that we see in the research that helps bring, treatments or methods of detection and identification that we would laugh at 10 years ago, a reality today, or 5 years ago. I mean, these types of advancements are occurring, for our patients, they're occurring at a glacial pace, and they'll never occur quick enough, but they are occurring and they are happening. But it's not just one thing. It's not just the research, and to piggyback on what everyone else has said, it's a combined effort. It's the advocacy from patients, their families, from groups like the UMDF, it's a combined effort that drives this push, that drives the research. If there was no advocacy, if there was no interest generated, then there would be no advancement. And this continued interest, continued push, continued advocacy is what, drives us and helps us identify, these disorders, and helps us identify, ways to treat them. And that's why we keep pushing forward with this. So it's, again, I don't think it's any one thing. I think it's the combined effort for that, but really that's what ultimately drives hope.
Thank you, Dr. Steiner. And last but not least, Dr. Cohen, but before I go to you, I just want to say that the community is what I think is what gives us all hope. It's so nice that we have a community that's cohesive, pulls together, whether it be the doctors, the drug companies, the folks that work in your offices, and all for the good of our patients. So I'm gonna let you go last, Dr. Cohen, and we'll wrap up after that. So you can take the floor.
So I agree with everything everyone said. I want to put a little bit of a different spin on it. Is sometimes all we have is hope, and that's going to be enough. When I started my career after graduating medical school 41 years ago, there was zero hope for children with spinal muscular atrophy. The disease occurs in 1 in 6,000 children, ultimately fatal generally before their second birthday. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, is there any hope for this disease? I would have said no. Some of the team members here treated some of the first patients with a novel, brand new gene therapy. It wasn't me, it was these guys. I forgot who was on that project. I think Dr. Rossman was. This is now believed to be a survivable disease where the kids are walking. It's just unbelievable. The advances with gene therapy and Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, also incredible. And again, this is just in the last few years. And these are diseases that none of us had anything but hope for, because that's all there was. That's all there was is hope. Now there's science behind it. So I'd have to say, you have to be in this for the long game, and never give up hope.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. I want to thank the entire team from Akron Children's Hospital for joining us tonight. This was a really fascinating hour that we spent together. I want to make sure everyone knows that next month our Ask the Mito Doc will be on Wednesday, October 11th. Dr. Tonopolsky is going to be talking about diet, nutrition, etc. So please join us. You can scan the QR code or go to umdf.org and view this event on our event calendar. And we look forward to seeing you there next month. Again, thank you to the team from Akron. And I hope everyone